Hello everyone, this is going to be my last video on the functions in the first slot. I hope you've enjoyed this series thus far, and we're going to conclude today with Introverted Intuition, the dominant function of the INTJs and the INFJs. I know this function is a bit confusing, unclear, mysterious for most people. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand and experiment with NI. But of course I recommend reading psychological types before watching this video so that you can get Jung's perspective on it. The goal of this video is for me to kind of share with you my own findings, my own examples and ideas from what I've personally experienced with NI. So at the top of the screen you can see some keywords that are often correlated to NI. Like I mentioned in my last video, big picture and pattern recognition. I just see these things as dealing with intuition as a general Jungian function. And of course, since we're on the introverted side of intuition now, we can say that this will be more internal and more subjective. Other keywords that you might hear are insights, perspectives, planning, visions, future thinking, hunches, aha moments. And generally these keywords are fair. They do an alright job of explaining the traits of NI, but they kind of lack a good explanation of this mode of cognition, this form of attention. And we have to remember that NI, Introverted Intuition, is a cognitive function. So I'm going to try my best to explain how I view this function in my own way as clearly and simply as I can. So I really hope this helps you out. Okay, so a good way of looking at NI is to first consider that it operates on an axis alongside with extroverted sensing, SE. And if we're to take introverted intuition as the dominant function here, as in the first slot, then we can assume that extroverted sensing will be in the fourth slot. And I'd like to begin with some just very short characteristics of extroverted sensing. I already made a video on it, so I'd recommend checking it out. But I've concluded that SE is willpower, the will to act, to bring forth things into the physical real world through manifestation. It's looking at things objectively as they are and looking for the infinite detail in the real world. And NI, generally speaking, since it's an introverted function that is also intuition, we can say that it deals with intangible data, it is more conceptual, and it is mental. Whereas SE will be more tangible, it'll be realism or more realistic, and instead of mental, it's more physical. And of course, NI and SE are both modes of perception or perceiving information. Now, as you can see under this axis, I've drawn like a forest with a lake, right? Just a very simple illustration of the physical world. Whereas under NI, I just have a person here, and I want to draw a window here as a kind of representation or metaphor for NI. So what do I mean by this? Well, it's also important to realize that you are either doing one or the other, right? You can't think feelings and you can't feel thoughts. Now, the same thing applies with this axis of intuition and sensation. You can either look at something conceptually, look for the meanings of a thing, or you can look at it for as it is physically, as it stands in front of you. SE will be, objective, very realistically. So with this axis, let's take, for example, that there's like a spot on this window. This is like a real world example, right? Because if you stare at the spot on the window, then all of this stuff becomes very blurry and it comes out of picture, whereas this is more in focus now. Whereas if we take the opposite example here, if we look through the window, then we see this forest and this lake as it is, but we no longer see the spot on the window. It becomes blurry. It becomes out of our attention and out of our perception. So this is generally how it's going to look for the NI Dom, because since this is their first function, we can assume that they're going to be looking more at the window and these sort of images that morph in their mind more often than actual physical reality. And since this is their dominant function, they're generally going to spend about 70% of the day doing this. Like a vast majority of their attention will be dedicated to what they are seeing internally via images rather than what is directly in front of them. And this process is what I like to relate to NI, and I think the key word that you absolutely must understand for NI is visualization. Visualization. Through visualization, all of these things become possible, right? We can consider future events. We can plan things in the future. We can foresee. We have visions. We have perspectives. We gain insights through visualization. This is the mode of cognition that, for me at least, most resonates with introverted intuition, right? It's a form of conceptualization. Now, notice I did not say daydreaming here. I don't like this word. I really don't like this word because it can mean so many different things. There's maladaptive daydreaming. There's, you could be reminiscing of what someone said, of a memory that you've had. And there's a sort of inactive element to daydreaming. So I don't like using this word to describe NI. If I absolutely had to, I would throw in lucid daydreaming in that sense, because it makes it more active and more cognitive in a sense. But I still don't like it. I don't recommend using it. It's very general, very confusing. I think visualization is a much better word here. And so this is like the general, very basic way to understand NI on a simple level. Okay, so I'd like to direct your attention now to the bottom right of the screen, where I have this graphic. It's basically an illustration of the functions and how they would proceed from a starting point to an end point using a cognitive process. So if we look at NI here, we can see that the ball is starting here and it encounters an obstacle here. And it might appear that the ball has magically teleported to the other side, but what's really going on here, and of course I have to personify the ball a little bit, it's visualizing what it would be like to arrive past this objective and proceed onwards to the end point, to the goal, the finish line, so to speak. Now, its counterpart, SE, is just going to break through the wall with raw willpower and volition through the objective, reality that it is. SE is the most competitive, aggressive, kind of like fighting function, but it has the power to break through boundaries in the physical, and I will do so more in the mental, more in the conceptual. And they work together in this way. Before I talk more about NI, I want to do what I've done with all my other videos and kind of show what happens when the fourth slot, in this case SE, is turned off. So NI DOMs obviously will be using introverted intuition as the most frequently out of all the functions, and so we can say that SE is turned off. But so is the willpower, so is the, the tangibility, the realism, this understanding of physical reality and volition, the will to act, to manifest. And what can happen is, generally speaking, NI DOMs can be a bit clumsy, especially when they're younger. They can walk into things a lot, like walls and fridges. They can stub their toes a lot because they're constantly focused on their internal world more so than the external. So an example of this would be like, say I'm going for a walk. I might naturally go into NI and look for the meaning of an idea, and I'll kind of go into autopilot and waver in and out of reality and sort of realize that I just took 10 steps and I can't retrace them. And that's pretty bad, right? Especially if I'm driving, I really, really have to focus on the external, around the cars around me on the road, the environment that I'm in, my speed limit. And it can be a bit taxing energy-wise on the NI DOM, but it's not that they completely, turn it out at all times. No, that's not what I'm saying. Because NI DOMs still use SE, right? They still have that willpower. It's just that in order to bring things into physical reality, SE will be required. Without SE, NI is essentially to know something, but SE is to do it, right? To confirm, to verify that this is actually plausible. And NI wants to just stay in this mental conceptual realm where everything is subjectively experienced, and they can sort of get lost in their visions this way. This isn't the best example of NI as a mode of cognition, but it's kind of like when you're going to sleep and you close your eyes and you have these sort of images that are forming in your mind. And they can even be like symbols in a way, but it has nothing to do with past experience or memory or events that occurred during the day, or it has nothing to do with emotions or logic necessarily. It can lead to those things, but pure NI, it's just conceptual perception through visualization. And NI itself, it's a very pensive, ruminative, almost like trance-like state of being, where NI DOMs, it can appear that they're looking at something, like an object that's right in front of them, but what's going on in their heads is they're completely out of tune with the physical world. It's like their minds are constantly wavering in and out of reality, and more out than in. So NISE, when the NI DOM is in this mode of introverted intuition, it's kind of like seeing without seeing. I think that's the most simple way to describe it. Again, some examples would be like, always before I make a video, I always visualize everything and I just do it in my head. I don't even take notes. It's more like a mental notes, where kind of like an internal monologue where I know what I'm going to say and why I'm going to say it, and I can visualize at what points it'll be appropriate, and I can sort of construct it through this mental imagery. And all those images are going to come together and synthesize into one general idea or one concept that I want to address in my video. Now, I can do this for hours and I can just stare into the abyss. But when I actually, do the video, when I'm recording and editing and embellishing my clips or whatever. It's very similar to what I've previously envisioned, but it's never completely 100%, right? And this is the value of SE, is because it allows somebody to experience what is actually plausible in a realistic material sense. Another example for NI DOMs would be like if they buy a piece of furniture from IKEA or something, and they take all the parts out and the screws and the bolts and everything, and they look at the instructions, and they can kind of visualize all the parts being put in together, whereas SE is actually, hands-on experience actually doing it. So again, two different modes of perception. The same thing with chess. NI will move the pieces with the mind. SE will actually, move the piece and confirm a move, a checkmate or whatever. And IDOMs, when they're young, especially when they have a crush on someone in class, it'll be difficult to just muster up the courage and the willpower to go and talk to the person, and, ask them how they feel and if they'd be interested in going for a date or something. When they go home, generally speaking, they're going to be visualizing everything, even going up and walking up to that person or having a conversation with that person, and then going on the first date and where they would go and what they would wear, and then the second date, and then the third date, and just subjectively visualizing everything, and then fast forwarding and rewinding back to the first date and perfecting it, and then going in even more into the future to the marriage and the marriage ceremony, and then the house that they would live in together. All of that is going to be more real to them than actually going out and doing it. And this is sort of the imbalance of the first and the fourth, and why SE is so important for NI-DOMs to realize that it's there, and that SE is there to help you bring things into manifestation and to actually have experience, rather than just being trapped in your internal world, which can just go on forever and ever. And I know a lot of introverts have this problem, but this is amplified even more with INFJs and INTJs. Okay guys, so this video is getting a bit long. I want to conclude with some final thoughts about why NI is often characterized as dealing with duality or dualism, or how it's very dualistic in nature. And to do that, I'm going to borrow from Hegel a bit. And if you're an NI-DOM, I highly recommend reading Hegel. But I'm going to adapt his idea of the thesis and the antithesis, or the antithesis. And this is basically what is known versus what is not known, a force within an opposing force. And through this perception, there's a focal point that emerges, or a nucleus in NI, and this is where all the information converges to, because it's an introverted function. All of this energy is going inwards towards this focal point. Now, as far as this information, it's mostly gathered by extroverted sensing, what has been objectively experienced in the real world, how things work and manifest on a sort of material, physical level. And NI is more the idea, or the singular concept behind these things. So NI, it takes that information, and it's kind of like a vortex, and this vortex is the synthesis, right? The middle of the thesis and the antithesis is the synthesis, and NI synthesizes information or ideas. So synthesis is a very important keyword to relate to introverted intuition. And this is sort of the process that occurs, because NI, it's very dualistic. It's very yin-yang, black and white. It likes to consider what is true versus what is false. And for NI, what is known is just as valuable as what is not known. It's kind of like with Kant and Schopenhauer with phenomenon versus the nomenon, right? The thesis is kind of like what is consciously known, or whereas the antithesis is more the subconscious or the unconscious, what cannot be accessed by consciousness. And sort of the conflict between these two leads to the focal point. And when all of this is being converged and processed and synthesized, usually one idea will emerge, a greater, bigger picture, and encompassing general meaning of a thing, and truth can be extracted from it. And in truth lies an intrinsic essence of a thing or a concept. And these are all things that NI likes to deal and likes to extract from ideas. A really important word for NI is probe. NI likes to probe. It likes to go to places where it's not technically supposed to go, or where it's not appropriate, generally speaking. And it can be a bit invasive for others, a bit intense mentally to experience, especially when you're talking to an NI-DOM. They can kind of like look into your soul. It's kind of a side effect of being an NI-DOM. But yeah, I want to kind of conclude and wrap it up here before I make this even more complex. And I want to say that just like NE is more conceptual reasoning and blending, NI I like to call a synthetic visualization. And this process is always going on in the NI-DOM's mind. It's something that's an integral part of what and who they are as a person, and how they understand the world. And from a very, very young age, they will be on a constant journey for truth. To arrive at these conclusions, of course, it's going to need the assistance of the judging functions of thinking and feeling, as well as sensation. But a lot of NI-DOMs will be fascinated with the idea of truth. So I hope this has helped. I spent a lot of time making these videos, and I'll put a lot of effort into making them. So if you could please like and subscribe if you found this helpful, that would mean a lot. And I hope you've enjoyed this series. Thanks for watching.